Taking a ride on the QLINE, plus trying to take the politics out of redistricting. Is it possible? The future of Detroit Public Schools minus the EAA and headlines. Nolan Finley is here along with Nancy Kaffer, and MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, Craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Welcome to MiWeek, and thanks so much for joining me. I'm Christy McDonald. Big show coming up for you. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press are at the table to take on some of the biggest headlines this week. We're also going to be debating taking the politics out of redistricting and why you may end up voting on it. That's coming up for you. Plus, we'll take you on board the QLINE. Nolan talks with Matt Cullen and Kresge's Rip Rapson about the bigger transportation picture in Detroit, all while cruising down Woodward. You'll see it. And the bigger job for Detroit schools now that the EAA is ending. You'll hear one thing Interim Superintendent Alicia Merriweather says the district still has to focus on, and that is all coming up for you. So let's get started with our contributors tonight. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press. Stephen Henderson is off tonight. Nancy, welcome back. It's good to see you.
It's my pleasure.
All right, we've got a lot of things to talk about tonight, but we can't not quickly talk about what's happening in Washington. Of course, we taped the show a little bit earlier on Thursday, but Nolan, Republicans in the House, they're saying, look, we've got the votes this time to repeal Obamacare. What's so different this time around now?
Well, I mean, they had lost some of the moderates when they tightened up the proposal to give states more flexibility. There were some worries that the new policies would cut people off who had pre-existing conditions. Fred Upton went in yesterday, got another $8 billion for the high-risk pool, and those moderates seem to be satisfied with that. I think it didn't quite go far enough. You talk to insurance experts and the people in the insurance industry, and they describe the problem with the current law is that you can buy insurance when you need it and then drop it when you don't. It's sort of like the 7-day auto insurance, and without continuous coverage, that whole coverage of pre-existing conditions doesn't work. You've got to keep your policies going, and I don't think this new legislation addresses that.
Democrats really concerned, Nancy, obviously at the millions of people who would be losing their health care under this, and the fact that the Congressional Budget Office didn't have a chance to relook at this new plan before anyone's going to be voting on it today.
You know, one of the biggest triumph of Obamacare is probably that it has made simply repealing it politically unpalatable. You have to have a replacement. You have to cover people who are currently covered. We should be covering more people, but what's really disingenuous about this particular replacement law is that the worst consequences that are going to hurt the most people don't kick in until after the next elections.
All right.
Well, that sounds familiar. That was like the original Obamacare was designed to excuse any of the people who crafted it and voted for it for the consequences. So.
Well, we're going to have to see what happens with the vote
here
today. And again, it's being kicked to the Senate, and we'll have to see then again what they end up doing with some of it. All right, let's take a ride now on the QLINE. The M1 rail in Detroit will be open to the public on May 12th. But Nolan got a ride this week along with other media and had a chance to talk to QLINE head Matt Cullen and funder Rip Rapson from the Kresge Foundation. Take a look.
They've been testing it and giving media tours all day. So we're also joined by Matt Cullen, who is the CEO of this whole enterprise, and Rip Rapson, the head of the Kresge Foundation, who paid for a whole lot of it. Rip, this day's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah, way too long, yeah. I figure it's about 2 cents a day for the amount of money we put in.
How much money did Kresge put in, Rip?
We ended up putting in about $50 million, a little bit more.
And this is a $140 million project? And what percentage of that came from foundations and private contributions?
You want to break that out?
This is Matt Cullen.
Over $100 million came philanthropically, and so the project actually, the capital is 140, but there's other costs too. So we're closer to 170, 180 million dollars, and well over $100 million came philanthropically from the foundations and the corporate community.
And for the next few years, at least, you've got an endowment to operate it, correct?
We do. So we've been working to raise the funds necessary, and we have 5 years already in place, and we're working to expand on that.
So this is Detroit, so every good thing comes with a lot of grumbling, and we've been hearing some grumbling over the last few days about, you know, this isn't the real need in terms of mass transit in Detroit. You all don't pretend that this is a solution to Detroit's transportation problems, do you?
No, not at all. I mean, we expect it to be a catalyst. We expect it to be a catalyst for regional transit because we need better transit in the whole area. We were very disappointed. I mean, we wanted this to be a catalyst for transit, for economic development. We were disappointed last year with the RTA results, but we're, you know, sort of understanding of it, and I think we're all going to sort of circle back and get that done next time. But it's the beginning, and I think if you look at every community across the United States that's done transit, it starts and then it expands on it, and that's what we expect.
So this is a 3.3 mile route, takes us from...
Excuse me, we like to go 6.6 miles because it goes both ways.
Well, okay, that I guess that is true, both sides of the street. So you got this 3.3 miles from New Center to Campus Martius, just a little beyond, connects downtown to Midtown and to the News Center, the Medical Center, Wayne State, the Cultural Center, knits together this downtown footprint, which is rather sprawling, for the first time.
It does. I mean, if you think of, I don't know, as a community, but we're pretty unique. You think the incredible density of activities and development we have along this corridor. You know, the culture communities and the universities and the hospitals and the business community and what have you. And to be able to, with one 3.5 mile route, to tie together that kind of opportunity is pretty unique, I think, in the country.
So as we're driving down Woodward and along this corridor, we're already seeing signs of development, of new construction, a much better look along the route than we saw just a few years ago. What kind of economic activity do you all expect this to spur?
Well, I think the activity we've already seen suggests the activity we will see. I mean, Matt can talk in greater detail, but we commissioned a survey of how much money has actually gone into property development all along the route just to this date, over $7 billion. And when we were thinking of the payback, essentially the return on investment of a rail project for, let's say, $150 million, say it was a multiplier of 5 or even 6 times, that would have given you maybe $1 billion of return. We're actually looking at 7 times that. So I think what you're seeing is just the beginning. And the other thing I think, Nolan, is that these will essentially be acupuncture points. They will radiate out. It's not just up and down Woodward, but as you go to the east and you go to the west, you can already begin to see the kind of energy that's getting created along Cass and 3rd and everywhere in between.
So, Matt, you see people making investment decisions in Detroit based on this route?
No question. I mean, development along this corridor is just exploding. I mean, there was a study done not very long ago that the percentage of properties that have transferred hands from the riverfront to the boulevard and the north end between the expressways is incredible. And all of that was in anticipation of this project, I think, to a large extent. So, as Rip said, $7 billion worth of development so far, you know, as opposed to 4 to 6 times, 50 times so far, and that's just since 2013. And it wasn't just the economic development; it's redoing the street itself. I mean, it was beat up, 100-year-old infrastructure. The street lights were going out. Now it's a beautiful street avenue in the middle of the city of Detroit. Now we got high-speed wireless here. Now we have all the streetlights on a grid that's going to be taken care of. So it really becomes what it was from the beginning, the spine of the center of the city that you can attach to and build off of.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting when he's talking about the economic development and things that have been happening around the QLINE. Go ahead and Nolan, give us a sense of what it was like to ride it and kind of our overall experience. I love the video.
Moved a lot quicker than I had expected. The stops weren't all that long or that bad. Smooth ride. I mean, it was incredibly smooth ride. I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. I could see folks using it for short jumps up Woodward. It took about 23 minutes to get from the start to the finish, but most people won't be riding it that long. Most people will be on it for 5-10 minutes. I think it'll really cut down on the parking issues downtown. The hope is, and I think that'll come to fruition, is that people will park on the outer edges now of downtown, the folks who do commute by car, and then ride this QLINE in. I think that'll be possible. I mean, parking spaces downtown are inching up toward $200, $250 a month. You've got to have some relief. I think this will provide that. And, you know, you can see what's going on Woodward. Woodward looks a lot better from start to finish, at least to the boulevard, than it did before this thing started.
Nancy, why don't you go ahead and we talked about, or you know, Nolan asked Rip and Matt Cullen talking about how this is the beginning of maybe something a little bit more, and how this links into a larger transit picture. I think everyone in Southeast Michigan can agree that we're not totally the transit mecca that we want to be. But how do you see the QLINE fitting into possibilities in the future?
I feel like there's a little bit of optimism happening there. The heavy lift in terms of getting us moving forward on transit is getting folks in Oakland and Macomb counties, I guess specifically Macomb County is what derailed the RTA millage in the last election, to understand the value to the region of supporting a regional transit system, and we're not there yet. We don't have the RTA millage last fall that would have created this integrated regional transit system with these rapid bus lines that would have functioned a lot like a train on dedicated routes on major arteries, went down, and that was kind of the big hope everybody who works in transit was really putting a lot of hope on. So, you know, I don't know that this in and of itself becomes a catalyst for more transit development. It would be great if it did, though.
Well,
what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at reps and said he expects in 10 years this thing will go past 8 Mile. They eventually hope they can raise the money to bring it all the way up to Pontiac. Now, that's going to take some federal help. Federal government bailed out of this project in favor of RTA. RTA went down, and so in terms of a comprehensive plan, we're nowhere right now. I think they need to go back and design a 21st century plan that includes the prospect of autonomous vehicles coming, deals with the reality of Lyft and Uber, which the previous plan did not, and really take a look out 10 years at how people will be commuting and how people are starting to commute already with these rideshare programs, and build all of that in. I mean, for example, I'm not sure, you know, a big chunk of this RTA plan dealt with small buses that picked people up and took them to the doctor's office or what have you. And I think Lyft and Uber, if you developed contracts with them, could do that same thing a lot more efficiently.
Well, that wasn't actually a big part of the transit plan. That was some stuff they kind of had to throw in to sort of pacify some folks in North Oakland County who were irritable about the plan not giving them enough service. That was not what the whole RTA plan was predicated on.
Oh no, but it was a chunk of it. It was a big chunk.
I think this is good, though. I think, as Nolan was saying, this is going to ease congestion in downtown. Something Dan Gilbert, who owns so many buildings downtown and has all these employees, is now parking people north of the boulevard, and he has this fleet of shuttles that take people from up north of the boulevard to offices downtown. So this, presumably, he'll be able to put his people on the QLINE, which I wish we were still calling the M1 rail, on the I'm gonna call it that. Put them on the M1 instead of on this. You see these parking shuttle things all over downtown, and those don't help traffic congestion because they have to stop for pickup. Sometimes those don't go real smoothly. Sometimes they're stuck waiting. They're unwieldy. So getting some of those off the road, I mean, I'm assuming he would put his people on the train instead of the shuttles, is going to help alleviate some congestion in the downtown.
Right, and that opens. So it opens up May 12th. People will be able to.
Opens up May 12th. Yeah. It's a cheap ride, $1.50.
And it looked like it was like a Detroit News field trip there. We saw Ingrid Jacques in there.
Yeah, they took our staff out. I think they took the Free Press staff out earlier in the day and other media outlets.
Nancy, you're going to have to get on that ride next time.
I missed it. I can't. I'm looking forward to riding it. It looks like a good time.
But it's $1.50. You got 3 hours with that $1.50. So you can go up, get lunch, and come back for $1.50. I think the fare might be a little too cheap. It's designed to provide 30% of the operating costs, but it's one way to encourage people to ride it.
And I think it does in terms of development. Right now, if you work downtown, going up to lunch in Midtown is a huge, you have to get your car out of your garage, you have to drive up there, you have to find parking, which adds about a half hour onto your trip, and most of us don't have a half hour we can add on to a lunch. So this does open up, you could run up to Midtown to shop. You could, if you're in Midtown, you could run downtown to buy something. So that does, the economic development aspect isn't just about new stuff that'll come in. It's about making the things that are there accessible during the day to people who are there during the day.
Yeah. All right. Well, turning now to taking the politics out of redistricting. A group in Michigan is trying to educate voters about the possibility of an independent commission to redraw political boundaries. Here's a little primer for you. Every 10 years, the legislature redraws district lines for House, Senate, and Congress. And, it ends up benefiting whatever party is in power. And a group called Voters Not Politicians wants to get a ballot initiative together for 2018 where voters would decide on a constitutional amendment that would hand over redistricting to an independent commission. Now, not even talking about how difficult it is to get a ballot proposal going. Let's not even talk about that. Let's say that this finally gets to a point. Let's talk about the possibility of an independent commission. And I'm going to start with you, Nancy. Is that the right way that we should be going for redistricting, as opposed to leaving it to whoever ends up winning here?
So I think we definitely need to figure out a better way to do redistricting. An independent commission is a good way to do it, is a better way to do it. In one state, they had proposed the idea of having to get majority approval from both the minority and majority parties in the legislature for a redistricting plan. So you would have to get a majority of the minority party in addition to just a majority of the majority. So there's got to be, this is a little bit tricky to position this right now because we've got Republicans who have drawn the map, who have a lot to lose here if the map changes. But in the long run, this works for both parties because when Democrats get back in charge, they do the same thing. So you can see it as a blow to your party's interests if you take the short view, but in the long term, this is a more beneficial way to get more people than just the folks who are currently in charge involved in drawing these maps.
Is it tricky, Nolan? Because when you say independent commission, is there truly such a thing as an independent
commission? And that's
commission?
the devil in this thing. It's almost impossible to get a truly independent commission. I think the people pushing this are certainly not independent. It's almost entirely a Democratic group. I think there are plans.
Would you agree, though, with Nancy's point, though, that in the long haul, it would be better for both sides because flipping that, it's not just saying that Republicans have drawn poorly, that the Democrats have done it when they had a chance as well.
If you can figure out how to make an independent commission, and I think, again, that's a challenge that nobody seems to have encountered. There's a plan out there that I think is a very good one, and that would be to cut the total number of Senate districts to 33. Cut the number of House districts to 99 to reflect our shrinking population, and then require that each of those Senate districts contain 3 House districts. So you cut down on gerrymandering or the ability to gerrymander quite a bit. I mean, you really put some restrictions on the ability to draw out crazy districts. If you say each of these districts has to contain, each of these Senate districts have to fully contain 3 House districts.
I mean, you're never going to get up this perfect, pure system, but you can do better than what we're doing now.
Well, there's no doubt on that.
I think it's
part of the challenge.
Well, let me ask you about the challenge of educating voters to this prospect and then having it actually become some kind of ballot proposal there.
Yeah, I doubt it'll ever make the ballot. That's an expensive process. But I think legislatively you could take this up and fix this and fix it in a way that satisfies everyone, or mostly satisfies everyone. Part of the challenge in drawing congressional districts, for example, is now you're into federal law and the Voting Rights Act. Detroit has 670,000 people now, 78. You've got each congressional district contains 720,000 people. Detroit should be a single self-contained congressional district, but because you can't eliminate a majority-minority district, they've got to take these districts and pick up pockets of minority voters here and minority voters here, and it looks like a mess. If you could contain Detroit as one district, you'd do a lot to cure that gerrymandering look of these districts.
The challenge of educating voters on this, Nancy, what would you say?
So the League of Women Voters did a series of town halls, I want to say 2 years ago, and what they found was that when they explained this to folks, that folks say, yeah, no, this is not how it should be, we want to do it differently, but that the majority of people didn't know about the issue, they didn't understand it. When they explained to them, they totally understood it, got it instantly. But it's reaching enough people to make them understand how important it is the big challenge.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on, we are heading towards the end of the school year, but there's still a lot of work to be done at Detroit Public Schools Community District. There's a new superintendent coming, and the end of the EAA, which means those schools in that turnaround district will be back under the DPSCD umbrella. Interim Superintendent Alicia Merriweather says there still needs to be focus on one important point.
It's not enough just to keep schools open. We need to keep pushing towards excellence in every single school. And until that's accomplished, the work is not done, right? So there's lots of things left undone. I do think a path has been laid. The academic plan that was developed with over 200 people assisting, including focus groups from universities and community members, that has laid the course. And if we stay on that course, those 5 pillars of literacy, innovation, career pathways, family and community, and wraparound services, if everything in this district continues to be focused on those 5 pillars, I'm confident that we will see genuine, authentic, and continuous growth towards proficiency over the next several years. But it has to stay focused. We cannot have all of these different plans going all of these different ways. Everyone needs to be focused, understand what the plan is, stay the course. One of the things that's said about Detroit Public Schools Community District is, you know, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. I would argue that this district has not been allowed to do the same thing over and over for any length of time.
What's the cause of that?
Well, we've had 5 emergency managers in 7 years. We had state management 16 of the last 20 years with multiple different leaders. And so all of those things, every time you have a new leadership, there's this risk of a turnover and churn at the top, and then that obviously trickles down all the way down to the classroom. And until we can stay focused and keep everyone aligned on what the goal is, the strategies to get there, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, aligning our partners, aligning our resources, until we can do that with fidelity, you're not going to see proficiency, you're not going to see accelerated growth. And we need accelerated growth because we have gaps that require accelerated growth, not just 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. You're really talking about 2 years growth in 1 year's time, or 3 years growth in 1 year's time, if we're going to close those gaps.
A lot to do. Nolan, talk to me a little bit about what you think the challenge is going to be with bringing in now these EAA schools are going to be brought back into the DPS, and the challenges they're going to be facing there.
It's bringing back the EAA schools, which started out as some of the worst schools in Detroit, as well as bringing up to proper level these schools that were scheduled for closing because they had been failing for so long. They've got an enormous academic challenge. I think she's right. There's not been any consistency, and you do need a plan that everybody locks into and stays with. I think it would be wise for the new superintendent to make Alicia the chief academic officer and let her push this mission. She's very passionate about it, but I mean, she sounded an awful lot like the governor did 5 years ago when he started the EAA and said all these very same things. And here we are now, another failed experiment. They can't afford to keep having experiments that go awry.
Especially if you've got kids in a school and it's like, wow, that was an experiment on my child. That did not work. What are the challenges that they're facing now in bringing these kids back into the fold?
Well, we're now on a statewide basis on something like the 3rd or 4th study coming out that's going to tell us what we need to be spending and doing to educate children adequately. There's an Oakland County Research Collaborative study that's going to come out about what schools need to be doing to educate children. They all more or less said the same thing. The Governor's Commission, the Adequate Education Study. We need to be spending more money. It costs more money to educate children who come from poverty, children who are English language learners, children who have in special ed. This stuff costs more money. There's a lot of research out there, peer-reviewed research, that shows how you can effectively teach children who come from these different circumstances. And what we seem to keep doing is sort of studying the problem instead of providing teachers and school districts like DPSCD the resources they need to do the job.
Yep. All right. And finally tonight, Nolan, I want to give you a chance to talk real quick. You were in Lansing last night, and you did a screening of Pathways to Prison. And Nancy, actually, you were here on the show, and we talked a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago. Who was up on the panel?
Well, we had a lot of legislative staffers, some lawmakers. in the audience. We had some corrections folks and advocates in the audience. The panel was Senator John Prose, who has done some remarkable work in the Senate, David Langdon in the House, Representative Justice Bridget McCormick was on the panel, Barbara Levine, who was in the movie, and Yusuf Shakur, who was in the movie, a former inmate who is now advocating for prison reform. It was a good panel.
All right, get people talking about a little bit of criminal justice reform. Nancy Kaffer, thanks so much. It's good to see you as always.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right, and that is going to do it for My Week. You can read Nancy Kaffer in the Detroit Free Press as always. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and of course, myweek.org. Make sure you come back. See us next Thursday for another My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Take care.